I'm Daniel Tran, 34, the eldest son of a family that owns a multi-generational textile company in San Jose. It was a Thursday morning when I stood outside the building where I'd spent 20 years folding bolts of fabric, handling supplier invoices, and repairing the rusted chain on the delivery truck more times than I could count. The sun was already hot against the back of my neck. I wore a navy button-up, same one I always wore to meetings, creased down the arms and clean, despite the little fray near the elbow. I stood in the lot, holding a lukewarm iced coffee in one hand, staring at the door that no longer opened for me. Inside, a few early employees moved past the glass. I spotted my Uncle Min's familiar gait, and then my cousin Eric, tapping away on a tablet like he was running a Fortune 500 boardroom. I pulled the handle. Locked. I knocked once. Nothing. Then the door opened an inch. A young woman with straight bangs and a name tag that read, Paige, operations assistant, peered out. She didn't recognize me. Can I help you? She asked. I'm here for the Thursday review. I'm Daniel. My father is Kong Tran. This is Tran & Sons Textiles. She tilted her head. I think you'll need to speak to someone higher up. Wait here. She shut the door. A minute passed, then 2. I shifted my weight, sipping from the watered-down cup, listening to the hum of the old rooftop HVAC that used to sputter like a dying mule when I maintained it. Finally, Uncle Min opened the door halfway. He didn't smile. Daniel, you weren't on the list today. What list? I asked, baffled. Dad always brought me on Thursdays. I've never needed an invite. Things have changed, he said curtly, eyes flicking behind me like he was afraid someone might see us talking. Changed how he leaned in. Your father is stepping back. We've restructured. The board voted, and the family seat was consolidated. Eric's leading operations now. You weren't responsive during the last talk, so we moved forward. I wasn't responsive because no one called. I said slowly. I've been here for 2 decades. I built up an entire shipping company. I know. Daniel? Min said. More carefully. You're not on the new chart. I'm sorry. I can't promise that. My throat felt dry. I stepped back a little, stunned, holding the door frame like it might steady me. Behind him, I saw Eric, tall, flashy smile, shirt collar a little too sharp, gesture toward us. Everything all right? He called out, though his voice was more performative than concerned. Min just nodded and closed the door. I stood there, heart pounding in my ears, staring at the name Tran & Sons carved into the brass plaque beside the entry. For a moment, I thought maybe it would dissolve. Maybe it was just a dream. But no one came out. No one called my name. That's when I turned to you, the one watching, wherever you are. Maybe with that same feeling in your chest like someone took your name and erased it from the door of your own life. If you've ever been pushed out of something you built with your own hands, if you've ever been made to feel invisible by your own blood, I want you to drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what they took from you. And if you've ever had family drama leave you speechless, hit that like button, subscribe, and stay, because I promise, this story is just getting started. Now, just as I was about to turn and leave, a voice rang out behind me. Mr. Tran. Daniel. Tran. I turned around. A man in a gray wool vest and dark trousers stepped from a black SUV parked by the curb. His shoes were polished to a shine. He had a file folder in his hand. Yes, I said, confused. He walked up to me, speaking clearly. Sir, I'm from Westbridge Holdings. We finalized the transfer this morning. The paperwork just cleared. You're now the legal owner of the property leased by Tran & Sons Textiles. For a second, I didn't understand. Behind the glass doors, people began to look. Eric's face was visible, frozen. Wait, I said. The building. Yes. Congratulations, the man said, handing over the folder and stepping aside with a respectful nod. I looked at the brown folder in my hands. I looked up at the brass plaque. I looked through the glass. And in that split second, the building I had been cut out of was now mine. The hallway buzzed as people paused what they were doing. A delivery man waiting by the service door froze mid-step. And Eric. His face had gone completely white. The air shifted. And for the first time in years, I felt the weight begin to move off my shoulders. I didn't walk into the building right away. I just stood there, folder in hand, as if it might vanish if I opened it too fast. The air smelled like concrete and cut cotton familiar. Grounding. My hands were trembling slightly. I wasn't sure from what. Rage, vindication, or just the kind of grief that arrives when something ends, even if it was never kind to you. I looked through the glass again. Eric was no longer in sight. People had gone back to work. Uncle Min was probably explaining things behind closed doors, scrambling to regain control of the narrative, but the truth was sitting in my palm. I finally walked away. Not back to my car, but down the block toward the little coffee shop I used to visit with my dad. He always ordered Vietnamese iced coffee. No milk, said the bitterness kept his mind sharp. I ordered it the same that morning, sat by the window, and flipped open the folder. The documents were all there: property deed, lease agreement, transfer of title. I had officially purchased the building from the retiring owner, Mrs. Hathaway, a widow who ran a flower shop on the first floor for 30 years. We'd bonded months ago over shared stories of being forgotten, she by her sons who moved to LA, me by a family who traded loyalty for efficiency. It hadn't been a revenge plan when I started. I just wanted a foothold, some dignity. I'd saved quietly for years, lived in a one-bedroom, never complained. I reinvested every freelance web design contract I could land into commercial property searches. But when I saw the listing come up in March 140th Emerson Street, zoned commercial industrial, current tenants listed as Tran & Sons Textiles, I knew it wasn't revenge, it was reclamation. As I sipped the strong coffee, I thought back to when it all started unraveling. It was subtle at first. Eric came back from business school with polished shoes and ideas, slideshows and buzzwords like scalability and brand overhaul. He started calling the family company a legacy brand instead of a factory. He didn't understand the feel of raw thread between your fingers or the way humidity ruined certain cotton blends. Dad liked his enthusiasm at first. He reminds me of you, he told me once, watching Eric lead a meeting. I almost laughed. Eric had never pulled a 14-hour shift sewing torn rolls back into sellable condition. He never stayed after hours to patch the roof or fix the inventory software. During that week, the server crashed. He never loaned his personal laptop to the accountant for a payroll emergency. But I kept quiet. That was my role. The quiet one. The one who did what needed to be done. The meetings changed. I stopped getting calendar invites. Uncle Min started arriving earlier and locking the conference room. And then, one Tuesday, I walked in to find my desk cleared out. A sticky note said, "Transition in progress. See Eric for your new placement." I asked Eric. He said, "We're modernizing. Thought you might want to explore external strategy." "What does that mean?" I asked. He smiled like a salesman. "You're free to consult, Daniel. There's no limit to where you could take things outside." I took my box of things and left. I didn't go back. But I didn't disappear either. I started teaching part-time at a community college. I took coding contracts. Quiet. Steady income. No one knew what I was building. And now, here I was, owner of 140 Emerson Street. I paid my tab, folded the folder under my arm, and made my way back. This time, I used the side entrance, the landlord's entrance. The building was split into 4 units. The flower shop had closed years ago, but the signage still remained. A yoga studio occupied the back, run by a couple who were always late with rent but never missed a smile. The textile factory Tran & Sons occupied the front and central space. They were on a 10-year lease, renewed 3 years ago. They had no idea the lease allowed for biannual owner evaluations. I walked through the hall, stopping by the property management panel. My new keys turned smoothly. I stepped into the office next to the main workspace. This one had been empty for years, just storage and dust. I opened the blinds, letting light filter through the dirty glass. From here, I had a clear view of the main floor. Eric was pacing now, hands waving in the air. Min leaned against the desk, looking exasperated. I opened the intercom on the office wall and pressed the mic button. "Attention, Tran & Sons tenants," I said calmly. "A property inspection will take place this Friday at 8 a.m. Please ensure all documents, maintenance records, and fire safety reports are up to date. Daniel Tran, property owner." I released the button. For a second, silence. Then Eric's head snapped toward the speaker. Min turned around. I watched from behind the blinds. I didn't smile. I just stood still, letting them see me. Not in rage, not in triumph, just in truth. A minute later, my phone vibrated. "Eric, can we talk?" I locked the office behind me and stepped out through the front entrance, the same one I had been barred from earlier. I stood under the plaque again. The metal gleamed in the sun. "Daniel." Eric's voice was cautious. He had followed me out. "Congratulations," he said. "Thanks," I replied. He looked away, then back. "Why didn't you tell us you didn't ask?" I said plainly. Silence stretched. "You know," he muttered, "it's not easy running things now. Supply chains, digital integration, it's chaos." "You think I don't know chaos?" I said. "You think I wasn't the one putting out fires before you knew what skew meant?" His mouth tightened. "Look, maybe we didn't handle things right, but we thought you were tired, out of it." "I was never out of it," I said. "I just wasn't loud like you." We stood there, 2 versions of what this company could have been. "You're still our family," he said finally. "That hasn't changed." I stared at him, unsure what to say. Then I said, "Tell that to the board. Tell that to the empty seat you consolidated." He looked away again. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need a seat anymore. I had the keys. Eric opened the door to head back inside, but paused. "What do you want?" "Daniel, rent control." I looked past him to the factory floor. Machines humming, fabric being cut. My family's legacy still alive in the threads. "I want you to keep the lights on," I said, "and I want you to know I'm watching now." He nodded once, then disappeared behind the door. I stayed outside a moment longer. This wasn't revenge, it was balance. The building had been rebuilt from under me, and now, I had rebuilt from beneath them. The inspection day came faster than I expected. Friday, 8:00 a.m. I arrived 10 minutes early in slacks and a plain charcoal sweater. No tie, no briefcase. Just the man they thought they'd erased now standing with a clipboard and a legal pad, waiting by the freight entrance. The air smelled like motor oil and eucalyptus. The yoga studio had incense wafting through the back hallway again. I could hear muffled laughter behind the glass doors, but inside the main factory floor, Tran & Sons was dead quiet. I stepped in. Rows of sewing machines stood like metal sentinels. The staff were trying not to look at me. I noticed how the lighting flickered faintly above Station 3. I made a mental note: fire hazard. Min came out first, hands tucked in his jacket, voice steady but unsure. "Daniel, thanks for coming in." "I gave notice," I said. He nodded. "Yes, yes." Of course. Right this way. He led me through the office corridor, where Eric was already seated in the conference room. My father's old chair, I noticed, pushed into the corner, unused. Eric stood. We've gathered everything. Lease compliance, financial records, fire exits, maintenance checks. Just formality. Right. I didn't answer. I sat at the table, placed the clipboard down, and began flipping through the papers they slid across. The silence was brittle. After a while, Min tried to fill it. So, how long have you been planning this? Does it matter? I replied. You made your choices. I made mine. Eric leaned back. Look, if this is about the board seat, we can revisit the structure. Maybe a silent partnership. I looked him in the eye. You offered me silence once already. I took it. Now it's yours to keep. The words hung in the room like smoke. Min shifted uncomfortably, then forced a chuckle. Daniel, we're family. Family doesn't lock family out of their own building, I said. No one replied. I signed the inspection sheet. Everything was technically up to code. Barely. I made a note that some of the equipment was outdated, borderline unsafe, but I let it pass for now. As I stood to leave, Eric spoke again. You know, we've been trying to expand, add a digital branch. It's been slow. Not my concern, I said, but you could help. I paused at the doorway. You didn't want my help. You wanted my absence. You got it. Then I walked out. It wasn't until later that I realized what I felt wasn't pride. It wasn't revenge, either. It was grief. I missed my father. I missed his quiet confidence, his presence on the floor, the way he'd check every thread spool personally. He would never have let it come to this. And maybe, if I'm honest, I wondered what he would have thought of what I'd done. Would he have been proud or disappointed that night? I drove to my parents' house. The porch light was still the same yellow glow, softened by moth wings and age. My mother opened the door. Her hair was shorter than I remembered. Her eyes widened when she saw me. Daniel. Hi. Mom. She pulled me in without a word. The smell of star anise and chicken broth hit me immediately. She had always cooked too much on Fridays. I thought you were still angry, she said after a while, sitting beside me on the couch. Maybe I still am, I admitted. She nodded, smoothing a wrinkle in the blanket on her lap. Your father. He didn't want that to happen, but he let it happen. I said. She didn't deny it. He was tired. Eric was loud. Min was persistent. You were quiet. You always were. I thought if I stayed steady, they'd notice. I said. She looked at me then, with that same half-smile she used when I brought home straight A's, but forgot my lunch. Not everyone sees gold unless it glitters. I swallowed the lump in my throat. Did he know I asked? Before he passed, he told me. Daniel will be fine. He knows the shape of things. He'll find his way around them. That was Dad. Never told me how to fight. Just assumed I would find a path through the fog. I stayed for dinner. We didn't talk about the building, or Eric, or Min. We talked about the plum tree out back, about how the dog next door still barked at shadows, about nothing. And for a moment, that felt like enough. The next morning, I arrived back at the building with something different in my hand, a proposal. Not for control, not for a board seat, but for something else entirely. A 5th unit. The empty storage space beside the yoga studio had potential, and I had ideas. I waited in the common hallway until Eric passed through. He hesitated when he saw me, like he expected another inspection. I'm not here for that, I said. He raised an eyebrow. Then, would I want to rent the 5th unit? He blinked. For what? A small project. Fabric reuse and upcycling initiative, educational programs, online microstore, community partnerships. He stared. You want to run your own company inside this building? It's mine. Remember I said. He didn't smile, but he didn't object either. You're going to compete with us. I met his eyes. No, I'm going to remember what we used to be. That's all. He looked down at the paper I handed him. A clean, formal tenant application, already signed, rent offered on time. He sighed, folded it slowly, and nodded once. I'll send it to the team. That was all. Weeks passed. I began bringing in bolts of discarded fabric from local suppliers, old tablecloths, dye-damaged sheets, misprinted banners. I hired 2 part-timers from the college, young, energetic, curious. We called it Threaded Roots. We didn't make much money in the beginning, but people came. Schools brought students. Nonprofits sent volunteers. We taught them how to stitch, patch, remake. We turned waste into art. Sometimes. I caught employees from Tran & Sons peeking through the glass, curious, unsure. One afternoon, Min walked in, alone. He didn't say anything at first, just walked the perimeter, running his hand across the table where we laid out scraps. This was your idea all along? He asked eventually. No, I said. My idea was to disappear, and yet, here you are. I looked at him, because something good can still come out of this building, even if it's not from upstairs. He nodded. I see that now. Then he left. That night, I stayed late, alone. I sat in the back room with the lights dimmed, and I remembered being 8 years old, helping my father carry thread rolls up the stairs. He looked back at me then, smiling. Always carry from the bottom. The weight centers there. Maybe he wasn't just talking about thread. Maybe he was telling me know where your strength lives. And I did. I was building something now. Quietly. But it would last. The first letter arrived on a Thursday. It was folded twice, printed on Tran & Sons letterhead, and hand-delivered by someone from their administrative team I didn't recognize. I opened it with quiet hesitation. It read, Daniel, we're preparing for a potential rebrand and strategic shift. Given the proximity of your new business and its growing visibility, we believe a collaboration, or at least a dialogue, would be in the best interest of all parties. We would like to invite you to a meeting with the current board and executive team next Tuesday at 3 p.m. Respectfully, Eric Tran, Managing Director. No apology, no acknowledgement of what they had done. Just corporate language pretending we had all arrived here fairly. Still, I stared at the letter longer than I meant to. I folded it back up and placed it in the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet. Under our first order sheet from the community center and a Polaroid one of the interns had taped to a recycled canvas tote. A girl from Lincoln High smiling while holding a crooked hand-sewn pillow she'd made with her own 2 hands. That's the kind of work I wanted to do. Not branding, not boardrooms. Meaning. But curiosity has its gravity. And the past always waits in polished chairs with filtered water. So, I went. Tuesday came. I put on a clean shirt, nothing fancy, and walked up the stairs I used to mop every Friday. The smell was the same dust and starch and the faint, industrial scent of ink on cardboard. Min greeted me with an awkward half-smile. He looked older than I remembered. Thinner, too. They're inside, he said simply, holding the conference room door open. There were 5 of them. Eric at the head, his sleeves rolled, shirt collar crisp. 2 other board members I vaguely recognized, shareholders or extended family, and a woman I hadn't met before. She wore a gray blazer and had a tablet open in front of her. Consultant. Probably. Daniel, Eric said. Thank you for coming. I nodded but didn't sit. He gestured. Please, let's talk. I took the seat furthest from him, back against the wall. Eric launched into a presentation charts, growth projections, new branding plans, overseas manufacturing partnerships. He used words like vision realignment and generational pivot. The consultant clicked through slides while he spoke. It was all sleek, mechanical, emotionally sterile. Then he got to the part that actually mattered. We've noticed that your initiative downstairs is gaining traction, he said. It's received some press, community recognition, strong online engagement metrics. I said nothing. Eric continued. We'd like to propose a formal partnership. You would continue your work under the Tran & Sons umbrella as our sustainability branch. You'd have resources, visibility, funding, and we'd unify the brand again stronger together. I finally spoke, so I become a department under the company that erased me. A silence spread like ink in water. The consultant shifted in her seat. Eric kept his voice calm. Daniel, this isn't about the past. It's about the future, about what we can build together. I looked across the table at each of them. You didn't want me until other people did. Min exhaled. That's not true. Yes, it is, I said, gently. And that's fine. I'm not angry. I just need to know why this matters now. Eric hesitated. Then, softly, he said something unexpected. Because we're struggling. He looked around at the others, then down at his hands. The numbers look good, but it's hollow. Orders are flatlining. Overseas costs are rising. We've lost the core. People don't trust legacy anymore. They want heart. And somehow, you found it. He didn't say it with resentment, just quiet truth. I let that sit. For a long time. Then I stood. You have my answer, but it won't come today. Eric looked surprised. What does that mean? It means I'll think about it. But not because I want your approval, because I want the story to be whole, not repeated. I walked out. That night, I took out a notebook I hadn't touched in years. It was my father's, leather-bound, worn at the edges. Inside were notes on dye temperatures, machinery quirks, and handwritten records of every major order. But between the lines were messages only someone like me would understand. Don't scale what you haven't held. Names fade if they aren't touched with care. Roots before ribbons. I read those lines again and again. My decision was forming like fabric drawn from a spool. Days passed. I worked late with the interns. We started a quilt project using only damaged material, every stitch done by someone with no sewing experience. It was beautiful in a chaotic, imperfect way. It told a story without needing to explain itself. Then came a knock on the door. It was Eric. Alone. No documents. No suit. He looked tired. I'm not here to push, he said. Just to ask what you need. I let him inside. The space smelled of thread and old books. The floor was scattered with fabric scraps and paper patterns. It was messy. Alive. I don't need anything, I said. But the people who come here do. So if you want to help, really help, start by showing up. Not with money. With your hands. He nodded slowly. Okay. And if we ever partner? I added. It won't be as departments. It'll be as equals. Different stories. Same roots. Eric didn't argue. He just looked around. Dad would have liked this place. He would have built it with me. I replied. We stood in silence, the hum of the heater filling the gaps. Finally, Eric said, Can I come by next week, volunteer? I smiled. Just a little. Only if you can thread a needle. He laughed. I'll bring my reading glasses. He left without a handshake or promise, just presence. That was enough. Weeks later, I saw him back, wearing jeans, hair out of place, helping a teenager untangle a jammed sewing machine. He didn't talk much, just followed, learned, and slowly, others came too. Men, even some former staff I thought I'd never see again. Not to work for me, to work with me. We weren't rebuilding the company, we were growing something else. No brand name, no hierarchy, just a shared space, a shared thread. I kept the keys to the building, yes, but I stopped using the locked office. I moved my desk into the center of the workshop. I wanted to hear the stories, the mistakes, the little joys. Some evenings, I sat by the front window as the light faded, watching people carry their work out in tote bags stitched with initials and imperfections. And I knew then I hadn't bought the building to win. I had reclaimed a home that no one else knew how to protect. And maybe that was always the point. Months passed. The air warmed. Windows stayed open longer. And the sounds inside the building changed. Where once there had been only the steady grind of industrial sewing machines, now there were bursts of laughter, the scuff of chairs on cement, and voices reading instructions aloud over the clatter of scissors. I found myself working later each week, not out of necessity, but because something about dusk in the studio felt sacred. There was a hush to it. Fabric dust hung in the amber light, and the frayed edges of the day seemed softer somehow. One evening, as I packed away a batch of recycled denim bags stitched by a group of retired nurses who came in weekly, my phone vibrated. A message lit the screen. From Eric. "Are you free to talk tomorrow? I'd like to show you something." I stared at it for a while before replying. "Sure. After lunch." The next day, he met me not at the studio, but outside. He wore a simple t-shirt and jeans, and for once, no watch, no performance. We walked 3 blocks in silence until we reached a vacant storefront, a narrow building tucked between a barbershop and a bookstore, with dust on the window glass and "For Lease" taped crooked on the door. Eric fumbled for keys. "I signed a temporary lease this morning," he said. 6 months trial. I raised an eyebrow. For what he didn't answer directly, just unlocked the door and stepped aside so I could enter first. Inside was nothing but bare floors, faint stains on the walls, and echoes of a life that had moved out years ago. Eric walked to the center of the space. "I want to build something different, something alongside what you're doing. Smaller, slower, connected to the community." I watched him quietly. He continued, "I've been working with local designers, young, local talent. We'll focus on repair, customization, hand-measured fits. No mass production, just human tailoring." I crossed my arms. "Why tell me this? Because I want to do it right this time," he said. "No board, no shareholders, just work." His voice had lost the presentation polish. It was raw, tired, and sincere. "I'm not asking you to join me," he added, "just to see it." I looked around again. The space was nothing special. Old drywall, scuffed baseboards, and a flickering ceiling light. But I could see the outline of what he imagined. And more than that, I could see that he wasn't chasing a market anymore. He was chasing redemption. "Let me guess," I said. "You're calling it something flashy." He smiled, sheepish. "Actually, no. Just Mend. That's the whole name." I nodded slowly. "That's a good name." That afternoon, I helped him sweep the floor. We didn't talk much, just worked. And for the first time in a long time, there was no competition between us. Only dust, and old floors, and the ache of learning how to begin again. Back at Threaded Roots, our studio had started attracting notice from further away. Local magazines wrote feature spreads. A regional arts collective reached out for collaboration. Someone from a large textile company even tried to schedule a meeting, but I declined. I had no interest in being swallowed up by a giant. What I did care about was the high school student who stitched a self-portrait into the back of her denim jacket and cried when she showed her mother. Or the elderly man who hadn't held a needle in 50 years, now teaching a weekly class on hand-stitched patchwork. We weren't just sewing fabric. We were mending shame, restitching purpose. Late one evening, I sat at the long cutting table as rain tapped softly against the roof. The door creaked, and I looked up. It was my mother. She held a paper bag in her hands. "I brought Ban Quan," she said, smiling gently. I stood, surprised. "You didn't have to. I wanted to see where you work now." I guided her inside. She looked around slowly at the pinned fabric swatches, the drying herbs in jars, the community wall filled with stitched quotes and pressed flowers. "It smells like jasmine in here," she whispered. "It's from a student's dye project," I said. "They use jasmine petals and black tea." She sat down. I opened the food, and we ate side by side at the work table. After a while, she said, "Your father would have loved this." I didn't answer. My throat tightened. She reached into her purse and pulled out something wrapped in a cloth. "I found this in his closet. Thought you should have it." I unwrapped it slowly. It was a notebook older than the one I already had. This one had sketches inside, rough drawings of machine layouts, shelving plans, even a tiny sketch of what looked like a community classroom. I ran my fingers over the pencil marks. "He used to talk about building a school," she said. "Somewhere people could learn to make things again." I looked up at her. "I think you already built it," she said. We didn't speak much after that. Just finished the food, listened to the rain, and folded the paper bag neatly when we were done. Weeks later, Eric invited me to men's opening day. I arrived before the first customers. The shelves weren't fully stocked. The signage was still temporary. But the space was warm golden light, soft fabrics, handwritten tags with customer stories. Eric stood behind the small counter, looking nervous. "Still time to run," I joked. He chuckled. "Not this time." We shook hands. No pretense. Just two men who had walked different roads back to the same thread. At the end of the day, I returned to Threaded Roots and found the interns gathered around the new quilt in progress. They were laughing about some stitching mistake, passing the cloth around like a sacred artifact. I watched them, unseen for a moment. Then I walked past, heading to the back room, on the wall above my desk. I pinned the second notebook, my father's older one, next to the first. Between them, I placed a stitched piece of canvas. It read, "Roots before ribbons." I stood back, looked at the words, and let the quiet settle. Not everything had been healed. Not everything had been forgiven. But we were no longer bleeding. We were threading something new. And this time, I wouldn't be left out.